Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about the causes of the Civil War. Why did we end up having a war against ourselves? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But here's the three main reasons, the three big S's. Number one, sectionalism. And we're going to break it down. So number one cause, sectionalism. Number two, slavery was an issue. And number three, states' rights. Whether states had rights to do certain things and whether the federal government could demand them to do other things. So these are the three main causes of the Civil War. Let's break it down. Number one, S, was sectionalism. So sectionalism is just when one part of the country looks out for only its own interest or thinks that it's more important than any of the other part of the country. So let's say you live in the north and maybe you think that your part of the country is the most important and the government should be helping your part of the country succeed. So they should be making laws and taxes that helps your part of the country even if it hurts a different part of the country. That's called sectionalism. And because of the differences between the North, the South, and the West, it was very easy to be divided over the differences. All right, now as we start moving westward, we just got done talking about sectionalism, okay, the differences between the North, the South, and the West. But as we start moving westward, our second cause of the Civil War comes in. Because we start moving westward, our main argument becomes slavery. Because as we keep adding new states and new territories, the big question becomes, does a new state become a slave state or does it become a free state? And this big argument eventually leads to South Carolina seceding and starting the Civil War. So let's look at how this argument kind of developed. Okay, so let's look at our very first compromise or our very first argument over slavery. As we start moving westward, the big argument is does a new state become a free state or a slave state? And why this is such a big deal is because as we start moving westward, there was 11 free states and 11 slave states, which means they were balanced and their power was equal or even. But as we move westward, Missouri wants to come in as a state, and they want to come in as a slave state. Now, the problem with this is it makes it unbalanced. That means there would be 12 slave states and 11 free states. So the slave states would have more power. So they ended up making a compromise. Missouri comes in as a slave state, and Maine is added as a free state. Now, they also create this little line under Missouri to hopefully help solve any future problem and argument about slave or free states. This line, this imaginary line that's drawn, as new states are added in the West, what's supposed to happen is any new state above the line should be free, and any new state below the line should be slave. But we'll see in the next compromise why that doesn't work out. In the Compromise of 1850, California wants to be added as a state. Now, the Missouri line should make California a free or a slave state. But California wants to come in as a free state. So this makes the slave states super angry. They're like, if California comes in as a free state, then everything's going to be unbalanced. That's not fair. What can we do? And they start freaking out. Well, what they decide to do is this. California is added as a free state, and what the slave states get is something called the Fugitive Slave Law. So anytime a slave runs away from the South and they run to a free state in the North, the free state has to capture that slave and send them back to the South. And this was a compromise made by Henry Clay. So the slave states were kind of happy, not super happy, and the free states were really happy because they got a new state. Now we get to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So we have Missouri added as a slave state, Maine added as a free state, California added as a free state. Well, honestly, the government is tired of trying to decide who is free and who is slave. So what they decided to do is something called popular sovereignty. And what this means is inside of the territory, so let's just say Kansas territory right there in the middle. What they say is Kansas, you can decide for yourself by voting. That's what popular sovereignty means. Whatever vote or whatever decision is most popular, that's the one that wins. So if there's more votes for slave state, then you're going to become a slave state. If there's more votes for becoming a free state, you're going to be a free state. Now the problem with this is tons of people start moving into Kansas to change the vote. So you have people who are pro-slavery or who want slavery moving into Kansas. But then you also have anti-slavery people moving into Kansas. And what it ends up happening is a bunch of violence and out of control acting. So the pro-slavery people, the anti-slavery people end up getting in lots and lots of fights. For 2 years, there's lots of violence over the decision, over popular sovereignty, over whether to become a free or a slave state. And really, this is the very first time we see violence and killing over the slavery issue. So we call these 2 years, we call this time Bleeding Kansas. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act gave Kansas and Nebraska the right for popular sovereignty, and because of that, it created Bleeding Kansas because of all the violence. Now, out of this violence comes this man named John Brown. Now, John Brown, to some, is considered a legend or a hero, and to some, he's considered a terrorist. The reason is because John Brown's an abolitionist, so he's anti-slavery, but he ends up killing a lot of pro-slavery people, and he ends up trying to steal weapons from the national government to hopefully get the slaves to rebel and gain their freedom. He ends up failing in his mission, he's captured, and he's executed. So it still stands. Is he a hero for trying to help the slaves, or is he a terrorist for going against the national government? So as you can see, the whole slavery issue is becoming really heated and not a good thing at all. Then you have something called the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott was a slave who was bought in the state of Missouri, which is a slave state. The thing is, though, his master, the person who owned him, moved to Illinois, which is a free state. And then his owner moved to Minnesota, which is another free state. And then after living in Minnesota for a while, moved back to Missouri. Now, Dred Scott believed, I lived in 2 free states, I should be free. So he takes his owner to the Supreme Court, and he sues for his freedom. In the Supreme Court, the court case is heard by a man named Roger Taney, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, which means the lead judge. So out of the 9 judges, he is the top guy. And this is the decision that is made. The court's decision is, number 1, slaves are not citizens. Slaves are property, like your phone is property, so they're worth nothing more than a farm animal or your phone. 3, the government cannot take your property, so therefore the government cannot set Dred Scott free. And 4, the government cannot make a state be slave or free. So this last one, something to notice here in this last one is what they're saying is the government can't tell a new state whether it's going to be a free state or a slave state. So they're saying the imaginary line of the Missouri Compromise doesn't count anymore. They're also saying that Dred Scott has to stay a slave because he's not a citizen, so he has no rights, and the government can't take him away from his owner because he's property. He's not a person. Now, we're going to get to our third cause of the Civil War, states' rights. Lincoln is running for president at this point. Lincoln wants to become a president. But while he is trying to become a president, he's going from town to town giving speeches. In his speeches, what he's saying is that he's promising he's not going to abolish slavery. So Lincoln's promising that he's not going to end slavery in the states that it already exists in. But what he is saying is that he won't let slavery be in the new states in the West. So what Lincoln's saying is the national government under his control is going to tell states whether they're free or slave. And what he's going to do is tell them that they're all free. The problem that the South has with this is they believe slavery is a decision that should be made by the states. It's a state right decision. So Lincoln gets elected in 1860. As soon as Lincoln is elected, South Carolina secedes. And after they secede, 9 other states follow them and secede as well. So the Union is dissolved. The United States has broken apart. The southern states make their own country called the Confederate States of America, and the United States stay with theirs, and they're called the Union. Confederate States, to make it the real deal, they even elect their own president, Jefferson Davis.